Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you on behalf of Secretary Connaughton. Here to speak a little bit about Virginia's P3 program. Now, there probably are as many different definitions of public-private partnerships as there are states that are trying to pursue them. So as we get into the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of projects we've done in the past, a little bit about projects that we are considering in the future. So we'll start off by talking specifically about what our legislation allows us to do, formation of our office, the role of the office, how we go about selecting and procuring projects, give you a flavor of current and past projects, and some lessons learned for authorities thinking about creating a P3 program or expanding upon an existing P3 program. Virginia's had P3 legislation since 1995. Legislation is entitled the Public-Private Transportation Act. Now, the legislation is quite broad and covers all modes of transportation. Under it, we can procure road, rail, transit, transportation administration, operation facilities, marine port, aviation, and even commercial facilities if those facilities are necessary or essential for the transportation of goods and services. Obviously, transportation is very political in Virginia. The PPTA is, is amended quite frequently and often a topic of debate in our General Assembly. Some recent amendments to the PPTA provided for interim agreements, which are essentially pre-development agreements that the Commonwealth can enter into. Also in 2007, a requirement was placed in the law that requires the procuring authority to do an independent audit of a concession agreement before that agreement is executed. Now, generally speaking, the legislation does not have a great deal of legislative oversight. Oversight is left to the procuring authorities, which are required to develop guidelines which govern the procurement, as well as interaction with oversight boards. So depending on which transportation agency is pursuing a project, there's an appointed board that oversees its functions. As I said, Virginia's had legislation since 1995, a successful track record of delivering projects. To date, Virginia's completed nearly $1 billion in transportation projects. We have another $5 to $6 billion either under construction or in development. One recent project that was mentioned in the introductions, 495 Capital Beltway Managed Lanes project, currently in construction. Now, this track record of doing these projects since 1995 has created a lot of institutional knowledge and set the stage for what Governor Bob McDonnell did when he took office in 2010, and that was the creation of the Office of Transportation Public-Private Partnerships. 2010, the governor audited the Department of Transportation. One of the audits performed by KPMG Corporate Finance was specifically focused on the P3 program. A number of recommendations came out of that audit. One was the creation of this separate multimodal office. Now, the Department of Transportation is the agency under the Secretary's Directorate that's pursued the most P3 projects. So the idea was to break out the institutional knowledge with the department staff who had worked on a lot of those projects, make them available across all the transportation directorates. Also part of the 2010 audit, the PPTA implementation guidelines, which are required by the legislation, were updated and amended to create more of a standardized process for project selection and screening, which we'll talk about here in a moment. On the slide, you see a number of goals of the new multimodal office. The key, the key here from our perspective is this fifth bullet down, consistent processes and procedures to encourage private sector investment. Private developers in the P3 space have a lot of options globally. Many do construction beyond transportation, power, power, energy, various sectors. And many of these developers have very limited staff to actually pursue projects. Developers we work with may have a handful of staff that will cover North America as a whole. So what we've tried to do is set ourselves apart by creating this office, dedicating resources so that the private sector understands when they come to Virginia to do business, when they invest in a proposal, that the proposal's not going to land on someone's desk that has 3 other full-time jobs within an agency. Now, updates to the PPTA implementation manual, new roles and responsibilities for our office, primarily making us available to other transportation directorates, other transportation agencies under the Secretary's directorate. So Department of Rail and Public Transit, for example, that does our mass transit, Virginia Port Authority, which manages port facilities. New PPTA process that is consistent, transparent, and efficient. And a little bit more on give control of the P3 program agenda to the Commonwealth. In the early days of the P3 program, many of the projects that were considered by the Commonwealth came through the doors unsolicited proposals. The legislation allows both for solicited and unsolicited. Unsolicited are a great option. They allow for innovation from the private sector. Private sector can bring ideas that the Commonwealth maybe not be thinking about in a certain time. A great example of that's the 495 Capital Beltway project, which originated as an unsolicited proposal. But now that as the program's matured, there's a real effort to shift that focus to solicited procurements and creating a pipeline of projects. Updates to the manual were prepared with input from all of the transportation agencies, external advisors, or Attorney General's office, and were posted for public review and comment. Got significant comment from the public and from industry. This snapshot is the organizational structure of the new office. As you see, you have the Secretary of Transportation at the top. Those are the transportation agencies that report to him. For sort of human resources and administrative ease, we're located under the Department of Transportation, but we support all the transportation agencies under the Secretary's directorate, and our office has a director who is appointed by the governor, works hand in hand with the various leaders of the agencies as well as the Secretary in terms of setting policy and developing projects. Now a little bit more on our project selection and procurement process. This is an overview of what that process looks like. What we've done is we've divided the process of selecting and procuring projects into 4 phases. We have project identification, project screening and prioritization, project development, and then finally procurement. Now, project identification, as I said, we have the ability to both solicit and accept unsolicited proposals. We also will work with the transportation agencies to understand their needs, review long-range plans put together by localities and planning organizations. We'll get into a little bit more detail about Phase 2 in just a moment, but as you can see, there are 2 decision points here. Those decision points take the form of a high-level screening and a detailed level screening of a candidate project. These are important as are decision points 3, 4, and 5, because the key here is that throughout a development and procurement process, the new guidelines are constantly reevaluating a project to make sure it makes sense from a business and policy manner as a P3. Sort of, not to jump ahead, but one of the biggest lessons learned coming out of the program is viewing P3s as just a way to get projects done because you don't have money. Not every project makes sense as a P3, and you want to make sure you have credibility in the market when you take a project for bid. So you do that by really going through a rigorous internal analysis to make sure a project you're considering makes sense. A little bit more detail on the screening process. So initially, we have a high-level screening process. Focuses on whether a potential project lends itself to a P3. Is it of sufficient technical and financial complexity? Does the private sector have an opportunity to create efficiencies through innovation? And also, does the P3 procurement methodology make sense, or is it better funded through traditional means or traditional procurement? Once a candidate project goes through that high-level screening, we have a detailed level screening, taking a harder look at financial feasibility of a project, also looking at public policy implications, ensuring that the project ticks the box in terms of a need for a particular area. Now, once a project goes through the detailed level screening process, they're dropped into one of three buckets. We have short-term, medium-term, and long-term priorities. Again, the idea behind creating this prioritization process is to develop a pipeline of projects so that developers in the private sector understand what's coming to market and when, can make business decisions based on that information. Now, this new process, Virginia is undergoing a review currently and expects later this winter to publish a set of priorities and a pipeline. Now, what makes a good P3? From our office's perspective, number of studies and different analysis that will take place through the development process as part of that high-level screening. We'll look at traffic and revenue analysis, maybe sketch-level traffic and revenue study to understand if it's a toll road project, what kind of revenues can be created, some preliminary financial modeling, do benefit cost analysis, value for money analysis. The office has published some guidance on what our risk assessment processes look like, what our value for money assessments look like. We've done that, again, to give visibility to the private sector in terms of what our thought process is and how we create or how we select projects, and also for public transparency, so the public understands the thought process that we go through. Now, a flavor of P3 projects throughout the Commonwealth. On this table, on this slide, projects outlined in black are completed. Projects in red currently under construction. Projects in blue under procurement, and green are projects that are currently going through that high level and detailed level screening process. Now, some of the early projects on this slide, Route 199, Pocahontas Parkway, Route 288, did not have a significant innovative financing component. P3 was really used to facilitate design-build delivery because the P3 enabling legislation predated our Commonwealth Transportation Board's ability to let design-build contracts.
There were a few people that just came in, P3 public-private partnerships, just in case some of you missed the earlier.
Projects under construction, Route 28, innovative finance there is tax increment financing for property along the corridor. Project under construction is the most I-495 hot lanes. This is the most recent P3 project to start construction in the Commonwealth. It's about $1.5 billion worth of construction, creating managed lanes on the Capitol Beltway outside Washington, D.C. and Fairfax County, Virginia. Projects under procurement run the gamut. Several are located in our Hampton Roads area, which has a lot of congestion because it's surrounded by a lot of water. So we have the Midtown Tunnel projects, an immersed tube tunnel project. We have the Route 460 project, which is a more traditional highway construction project that would run basically a new interstate quality roadway from Hampton Roads to the 95 corridor. The intent there is to facilitate movement of freight from the Port of Virginia. Port of Virginia is one of the few facilities on the East Coast that already can accommodate Panamax ships when they begin to sail, so we anticipate significant growth in cargo shipments through that area. Now, the western part of the state, congestion is not the issue, economic development is. Very interesting project, Coalfield Expressway. That project, the Commonwealth has a partnership with a coal company. Now, as the coal company does some mountaintop coal removal operations, they're leaving behind a finished at-grade roadbed. So then the Department of Transportation can come in and actually pave. So the coal company gets access to some facilities, gets some financial support for their operations. The department sees much less construction because you've got a roadbed waiting for you there. Now, under development, we're looking at privatizing some traffic operation centers. Patriots Crossing, which again is in the Hampton Roads area, ringed by water. This is another way to get from sort of mainland to the peninsula. I-66 hot lanes, which run outside of D.C. in Arlington County. The idea there, we're constructing managed lanes on 495. We have a project in procurement to put managed lanes on 95. And if we also have managed lanes on 66, we create a regional network of high occupancy toll lanes. And Port of Virginia office is currently looking at privatization options for the port. There were some unsolicited proposals a few years ago proposing privatization. The department declined, VPA declined to entertain those proposals, but instead we're looking at options now and expect sometime this winter maybe to go out to industry to get some feedback. Lessons learned. As I said, we've had 15 years in Virginia of pursuing these types of projects. You know, one key lesson is understand the limitations of P3s. Again, I think politically there can be a sense that P3s are a way to do projects when you don't have money to do them. It's not that's rarely the case in the projects that Virginia has done. For example, Capital Beltway project and the Midtown Tunnel project, which we expect to be under construction in 2012. The states contributed about 30% of the construction costs. Now, you leverage that investment significantly because the private sector is bringing equity to the table, bringing debt to the table to complete construction and fund operations, but it's not, the public sector needs to be prepared to make an investment to get these projects going. Developing a business process. You know, previously the guidelines, although they outlined a procurement process, did not really give a lot of detail on how projects were identified, selected, procured. That's what we're seeking to do with the new guidelines. Again, we think having that set process and using it consistently on projects creates that comfort in the private sector that this is a good place to do business. Dedicated staff. Now, before our office was formed, subject matter experts were spread throughout the Department of Transportation based on functional expertise, design, construction, finance, the like. You know, a dedicated office may not be for every authority because it is a significant investment of resources, but you know, at least within an agency, having staff that are dedicated to these types of procurements and projects really can help ensure that you deliver projects which will continue to attract that private sector investment. Public outreach is another key. Several of the more recent P3 projects do involve tolling. That can be a controversial topic. So what we've done in our process, we have public involvement throughout. And also in our, for example, the Virginia Department of Transportation in their traditional project delivery process, which would include public hearings on the environmental document, public hearings on major design features. If we're anticipating P3, we have a strong presence at those meetings to explain tolling so the public understands not just the financial aspects, but the technical aspects. Not a lot of toll roads in Virginia and the surrounding states, so the idea of high-speed open road tolling is sort of new. Everyone may be familiar with Easy Pass, but then they think about the cash lanes right next door. And the projects that we're pursuing are completely automated. So getting that information out so that people don't think you guys are creating more congestion with toll booths is really critical to building that public support. And one key point for our office has been close coordination with the Federal Highway Administration. In most cases with these projects, we're doing things that are very different from what FHWA does on most instances with states. we're seeking flexibility in how guidelines are applied and how the typical federal program is run. So we have very, very tight communication with our division office, and they're very involved early on in the project so that we're working in lockstep and we don't have issues that come up down the road. So with that, at the conclusion, happy to take any questions you have on the program, and thank you again.